Good evening. We are happy to welcome you. We are pleased that we have highly respected guests with us from the U.S. Nancy Jackson, Deputy Assistant Secretary, USAID Department Bureau on Population, Refugees and Migration, and Rob Jenkins, Deputy Assistant Administrator, USAID Bureau for Democracy, Conflicts and Humanitarian Assistance of the USAID.
Welcome here, Nancy Jackson, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. State Department, Bureau on Population, Refugees and Migration, as well as Rob Jenkins, Deputy Assistant Administrator, USAID Bureau for Democracy, Conflict and Humanitarian Assistance. So without much further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. This is my very first trip to Ukraine, and this visit has given me a great opportunity to learn more about the needs and challenges of the Ukrainians affected by Russia's occupation of Crimea and continued aggression in the east.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everybody. Like my colleague, I've been privileged and pleased to meet Ukrainians here, both here in our trip to the east, and have met with many international non-government staff who've been working hard to relieve the suffering of the civilians caught up in this conflict.
According to the most recent UN estimates, more than 3.1 million vulnerable people in Ukraine, many of them children, disabled, and elderly individuals, are in need of food, water, shelter, medicine, health care, and basic services. We have seen the devastating impact of the continuing violence affecting innocent victims in Ukraine, whose lives have been torn apart by the conflict. We met with remarkable aid workers and volunteers, many of them Ukrainians themselves, whose contributions to alleviating suffering every day are the reason why so many conflict-affected Ukrainians have access to food, water, and a roof over their heads. And we have seen firsthand during this trip that more still needs to be done. The continued support from the international community is critical to sustaining Ukraine's response to this crisis. That is why today we are very pleased to announce that the United States is providing an additional more than $28 million in humanitarian assistance. This brings the total amount of humanitarian aid from the United States to more than $112 million since the start of this crisis. This funding will help hundreds of thousands of vulnerable people. It includes more than $11 million from the State Department to support the activities of international organizations that are providing much-needed medical supplies, blankets, hygiene items, and food. The support announced today will help meet basic survival needs for thousands of vulnerable people. It will also improve access to health care services and will provide resources to aid in the prevention of and the response to gender-based violence. I'm happy to refer you now to my colleague from USAID for more information about the rest of our assistance.
Thanks, Nancy. The remaining portion of the $28 million in assistance consists of $17 million from USAID, and that includes $5 million to support the immediate food and nutritional needs of vulnerable people displaced or otherwise affected by this conflict. It also includes $12 million to support the efforts of international and local non-governmental organizations to provide humanitarian assistance through emergency and transitional shelter for those in need, cash grants to meet individual family needs, early livelihood to support, to restore household incomes, psychological and social support for those traumatized by the experience of war, especially children, clean water and sanitation repairs, and non-food items, such as basic household goods to those who have lost everything. We are proud to share in the efforts of the local communities to bring humanitarian assistance to their families, friends, neighbors, and fellow Ukrainians who have suffered so much over the past 2 years. Thank you, and we're happy to take some questions.
Дякую. Thank you very much. And please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Well, I have... Oh.
Oh,
Oh, yes, thank you so much.
they'll make it much easier.
Good afternoon. I am Larchuk. I am the representative of mass media of Ukraine, the newspaper of the Party of the People's Movement of Ukraine. You have now mentioned, I am an accountant. My background is accountant. You've mentioned some figures. To what specifically, to what accounts will this 11 and 17 million dollars, the total of $28 million go?
Thank you very much for those questions. I do not have a list in front of me of all the various locations that money will go to, but it's a considerable number of locations in the East, both cities and small villages, and that includes areas that are in areas currently held by the Ukrainian government, and also those areas that are not held by the Ukrainian government at this time.
And also, just to add, that money will go to and through international non-governmental organizations as well as international humanitarian organizations responding to the needs of the people.
Thank you.
Ruslan Denchenko, Voice of America. So you are confident that this money will not go to corrupt, I don't know, government officials or any other? Do you have any kind of mechanism to control the flow of money and the procurement?
Certainly, thanks for the question. So we take the responsibility to be accountable and to monitor and evaluate the performance of this money and to ensure that it's going to the people to which it was intended to benefit. And to that end, we use very reliable international organization and non-governmental organization partners to distribute this funding. These organizations have tremendous experience working in highly insecure and extreme environments, and they have very good track records. And at the same time, we have people here in Ukraine, both at the embassy and at the aid mission, who interact with those organizations and visit beneficiaries to ensure that the aid is getting to where it's intended.
We appreciate the support of the U.S. government in this particular respect, because Ukraine has so many internally displaced people, and especially in view of the current migrant crisis in Europe, with also many migrants. I was working on a project in the Netherlands for 3 months where migrant issue was a big issue, and I was always communicating to the local audiences there that despite the fact that we have so many IDPs, but because our government is helping and catering those IDPs, and also thanks to international support like that one of the US government, IDPs and actually do not become refugees in Europe, they do not flee there. So my question is the following, and basically, and also different populations have different needs. So if you have an idea, how is this needs-based assessment done? For what kind of people get and what are their needs, and actually is there anything done on the borders on the western part of Ukraine where some of the people could have made, and actually also from Europe as well, and from Ukraine to Europe, and how it's all going to be distributed in the country? So there are sort of two questions in one.
Thank you very much. Great question, and thanks for the work you were doing regarding refugees. All of this assistance that we're talking about today is based on need and goes to people regardless of where they're living or what their political affiliation might be or what their ethnic background might be. Having said that, all of this assistance is focused on people who are victims of the conflict in the East. And by far, most of those reside in the East itself today. Needs are assessed by the international organizations. Those are both the NGOs, but also the UN agencies and other international organizations that we work with. They work on combined assessments. They share their assessments. It includes UNDP and the World Bank, and it includes different assessments in different places depending on what the needs or the crisis might, or the sectors might be in those places. Clearly, access to the non-government controlled areas is a big issue, and we do not have the kind of visibility that we would like on the conditions there, but there are partners that work there, and they're able to base the needs, base their assessments on the actual need and make sure that the food, the shelter, the other assistance gets to the people that need it most.
We are particularly concerned about those who are particularly vulnerable, people such as children and the elderly and the disabled. So a lot of our funding does go to support those who are most vulnerable and as a result of this crisis.
Just one last question.
You have just mentioned that you don't know how the citizens of Ukraine, what is their situation on the occupied territory. I will tell you, the people who are there, many of them are supporting the separatists. They are the traitors of Ukraine, and they receive the Ukrainian pension plus Russian pension in rubles, plus Russia regularly sends them the food products. They are maybe some old products, but they regularly deliver these products there. The people from the east of Ukraine who are patriots, who did not want to live on the occupied territory, they get only 400 hryvnias a month here, and do you believe that everything should be distributed evenly? No.
I mean, there was, it's more broader, but there was also, we understand there were no assistance has been provided, of course, in the occupied territories. I mean, this is also part of the question.
Thank you. So Nancy and I traveled yesterday and the day before that out to the east, and we met many partners who actually are conducting work and travel into the non-governmental control areas. As we said before, all of this assistance is humanitarian assistance, which is delivered on the principle of needs-based. A hungry child has no politics. The children that receive the food that is provided through this are given that because they do not have food to eat. So the shelter that is provided, the other humanitarian assistance is based purely on need and not on a political affiliation one way or the other. Thanks.
This is just one more question about corruption. This is not the first time the United States provided assistance to refugees or these kind of people. And do you have any complaints about how this assistance was used previously? Have you had any accidents with stealing or corruption or any other complaints?
Thank you. No, and as Rob said, we met with a number of people receiving assistance from our partners, both in, when we traveled to the East, and we had very good reports. We had focus groups with a number of internally displaced people who really spoke very well and how much they appreciated the aid that was received. We saw firsthand roofs that were replaced on damaged houses as a result of the conflict, and people were able to reoccupy their homes. So we're pretty confident that the funding that we're providing through these international and non-governmental organizations are reaching the intended beneficiaries. Thank you.
All right. I think this is, thank you very much. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank you for a very productive trip to Ukraine, for all the assistance you have given to the country, and wish you a successful flight home.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.